Death occupied a unique place in the imagination of the ancient Greeks. It was not viewed as the absolute end of existence, nor as a mysterious void beyond all understanding. Instead, death marked the beginning of another journey, one that every mortal, regardless of wealth, power, or reputation, would eventually undertake. Just as life was governed by customs, obligations, and the favor of the gods, so too was the passage into the world of the dead. To the Greeks, a proper burial was not merely an act of remembrance, it was a sacred duty, one that ensured the deceased could leave the world of the living and find their rightful place among the shades of the underworld. The importance of funeral rites can be traced to one of the central beliefs of Greek religion, that the soul could not complete its journey without the proper ceremonies performed by the living. A body left unburied or denied its final rites was believed to remain trapped between worlds, unable to cross into the realm of the dead. Such a fate was considered among the greatest misfortunes imaginable. It deprived the deceased of peace while burdening the living with both grief and religious obligation. This belief appears throughout Greek literature, where the struggle to recover and bury the dead is often portrayed as an act of honor greater than victory in battle itself. When a person died, the funeral rituals began almost immediately. Family members, particularly the women of the household, prepared the body through a ceremony known as the prothesis. The deceased was carefully washed, anointed with scented oils, and dressed in clean garments before being laid upon a funeral bed inside the home. Around the body gathered relatives, neighbors, and friends who came to mourn together. Lamentation formed an essential part of this ritual. Songs of grief, spoken memories, and ritual cries expressed not only personal sorrow but also respect for the life that had come to an end. Mourning was a communal responsibility, reinforcing the bonds between the family and the wider community. Before dawn on the following day, the funeral procession, known as the ekphora, began. The body was carried through the streets toward its place of burial, accompanied by relatives and mourners. Depending on the region and historical period, the dead might be buried beneath the earth or cremated upon a funeral pyre. Both practices were accepted in Greek society, although burial became more common in many city-states over time. Alongside the body, family members often placed personal belongings, pottery, jewelry, weapons, or small offerings that reflected the life of the deceased. These objects were not simply tokens of remembrance. They symbolized the continuing identity of the individual as they entered the next stage of existence. Yet these earthly ceremonies represented only the beginning of a much greater journey. According to Greek belief, the soul departed the body at the moment of death, but it did not immediately arrive in the underworld. Instead, it entered a liminal space where divine beings oversaw each step of its passage. Among the first to receive the dead was Hermes, known in this role as Hermes Psychopompos, the guide of souls. While Hermes was widely recognized as the messenger of the gods and the patron of travelers, merchants, and heralds, he also possessed another, quieter responsibility. He escorted newly departed souls from the world of the living to the threshold of the underworld, ensuring they did not lose their way between the two realms. Hermes did not judge the dead, nor did he determine their final destination. His duty was to guide, much as he guided travelers during life. Ancient artists frequently depicted him carrying his caduceus, the winged staff that symbolized his authority, leading silent souls toward the rivers that separated the mortal world from the kingdom of Hades. In this role, Hermes represented transition itself, the divine companion who accompanied every human on the final journey no matter their status in life. At the edge of the underworld waited another familiar figure, Charon, the aged ferryman whose task was to transport souls across the river that divided the worlds of the living and the dead. Ancient sources vary on whether this river was the Styx or the Acheron, but its symbolic meaning remained the same. It marked the point of no return. Charon demanded payment for the crossing, and for this reason Greek families often placed a small coin, commonly an obol, inside the mouth of the deceased or upon their eyes before burial. Without this payment, tradition held that a soul might wander the riverbank for many years, unable to complete its passage. Beyond the river stretched the kingdom of Hades, a realm often misunderstood in later centuries. To the Greeks, Hades was not a place of universal punishment. It was the destination of nearly all mortals after death, regardless of whether they had lived nobly or poorly. The realm itself was governed by Hades, the brother of Zeus and Poseidon, who had received dominion over the dead after the defeat of the Titans. Though often feared, Hades was not considered evil. He rarely interfered with the affairs of the living and ruled his kingdom with stern impartiality. His task was not to inflict suffering, but to maintain the natural order separating life from death. Beside him ruled Persephone, queen of the underworld. Her presence reflected one of Greek mythology's most enduring cycles, that of death and renewal. Having been carried into the underworld by Hades and later permitted to return to her mother Demeter for part of each year, Persephone embodied the changing seasons and the recurring rhythm of life itself. Her annual descent and return became a powerful symbol that death, though final for individuals, existed within the broader cycle of nature. Before souls reach their final resting place, many traditions describe them appearing before judges of the dead. Among these judges were Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus, legendary kings whose wisdom in life earned them authority after death. Their task was to determine where each soul belonged within the underworld. Ordinary people entered the Asphodel Meadows, a vast and quiet realm where most spirits continued in a shadowy existence. Those remembered for extraordinary virtue or heroic deeds might be welcomed into the Elysian fields, a place of peace and eternal happiness. Meanwhile, the most grievous offenders against divine law were condemned to Tartarus, a deep abyss reserved for punishment. There, figures such as Sisyphus, Tantalus, and Ixion endured eternal consequences that served as moral lessons within Greek mythology. The funeral rites themselves did not end with burial. Families continued to honor the dead through annual ceremonies, offerings of wine, oil, flowers, and food left at the grave. These acts reflected the belief that memory created an enduring bond between the living and those who had passed away. Ancestors remained part of the household's identity, and neglecting their remembrance risked offending both the dead and the gods who watched over the proper order of human life. The importance the Greeks placed upon burial is perhaps best illustrated in one of their most famous tragedies, Sophocles' Antigone. In the play, Antigone defies the command of King Creon, who has forbidden the burial of her brother Polynices. She argues that the unwritten laws of the gods outweigh the commands of any mortal ruler. By risking her own life to perform the sacred funeral rites, Antigone demonstrates how deeply the Greeks believed that honoring the dead was not simply a family obligation but a divine one. The tragedy reminds its audience that political authority may change, but sacred duties endure. Through these beliefs and rituals, the ancient Greeks transformed death into a carefully ordered passage rather than an abrupt ending. Every stage of the journey, from the washing of the body to the crossing of the river and the judgment of the soul, was guided by ritual, memory, and the presence of the gods. Hermes led the traveler, Charon carried the soul across the waters, Hades maintained the balance of the underworld, and Persephone reminded humanity that endings and beginnings often belong to the same eternal cycle. For the people of ancient Greece, the funeral was therefore much more than a farewell. It was the final act of love that the living could offer the dead, an expression of piety toward the gods, and a recognition that every human life, no matter how great or humble, ultimately became part of the same timeless journey into the realm beyond the horizon of the living.